Hey guys, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
We can hear you.
Hi,
Excellent.
hey everyone. How's everyone doing?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, I'm doing all right. How about you?
I'm doing okay. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
What?
Okay, good. Just double checking. I want to make sure I didn't have any connection problems.
All right, guys. FYI, I'll have to hop off temporarily around 2 o'clock to take an inhaler, but I'll be back as soon as I'm done. So if you see me away from camera, then that's the reason why. Yeah.
Okay.
right.
And we have looks like probably a slightly bit of a smaller group, which is not necessarily a bad thing today. And I think it's April to say, I think the end of April at that. I think if we were to say we were all overwhelmed by now, that might be an understatement. But unless anyone has any specific questions, do you want to hear what I had in mind today that I thought would be fun? So I was asked by two different people this week alone on how to start your own charity, or should they start their own charity? And I also thought it would be a good idea. I don't know if anyone else knows. Did you know that all charities have to report all their financial information online, publicly available for everyone to see?
Every single one of them. So
Every single one of them.
one of the things I think I talk about, probably you talk about it too, I'm sure, Andrew and April, is to really do your research before you donate anywhere, right? Where, especially when you're in part of our community and you're probably struggling financially, right? So we want to be making smart choices about who you support and where you send your money. So I think that's going to be a great thing for people to know how to do.
Yeah. So I'll show how to find it, and we'll do a couple charities, but for comparison purposes. And then so we'll start with that. But does anyone have any questions before the charity? Was there anything else on anyone's mind? You guys came
Just
here
curious,
today.
how long has this charity rule online stuff been in effect?
Since essentially the dawn of time, as far as I'm aware.
Really?
So,
What I mean is, let's take, for instance, the 1980s. The internet wasn't widely available then. So you'd be surprised if that was the case then. What I wonder is, did it start around 1995 when the internet first came about publicly, or was it long ago than that?
well, it's been it's been a requirement to file it. I'm sure it was harder to file, right?
Harder to access, probably.
Harder
too.
to access, yes. So it's definitely, the internet's made it a lot easier, but charities have still been required to file this information. So does that
Interesting.
make sense?
Yeah, I guess.
So, and again, we'll post this one. I'm actually planning to do a share screen, the record, to be able just to show. I think it's a little easier that way. But also, I just wanted to give some basics on how a charity works, and I'm not going to pretend I'm the complete expert on starting and running a charity. But I have been involved with a lot. I do know, a pretty good amount. And I just thought I would share some of, my opinions if you were thinking, oh, I kind of want to start a nonprofit, right? Or you have a good idea. And Becca, do you want to give the one-word answer on what I said when you asked if you should?
No. No, don't, basically.
So now I don't think I gave you any reasons, and you were just like, I trust Andrew, I'm okay with that, right?
Well, Andrew's my trusted financial advisor, so when he gives me a response, I don't go further, right?
Yeah.
But you can, and he does, so he will.
And I will. So when it comes to a charity and starting one very interesting thing is the person who starts it, you don't own it. So I think that's something that's very important to consider, is who owns the charity. Can everyone see the ASAN website? Becca, everyone? Or
Let me see if I can. I don't see it. Oh, I can see it now. Yep.
oh, on the screen? Okay, cool. And actually, I'm just gonna also, hold on 2 seconds. I just also want to make Becca the host. That way, if anyone else comes in,
Oh, good deal. Yeah.
you can make you a co-host. So there you go. Okay, perfect. So is that news to anyone that, you don't own a charity you start, right? I mean, it kind of makes sense in some ways, right? Because the whole point of a charity isn't to make money, right? In theory, it's a nonprofit. There's a mission. There's a founder, but so there's, again, organizational structure. I'm going to give the very simplified version. So there is a board of directors. There is an executive director. Then there is also, again, individuals who work for the organization, donors, etc. Does anyone know who runs the organization? Who is actually in charge technically? Take a guess. The executive director, basically the CEO, or the board of directors?
It should be the board of directors, no?
Absolutely, it's the board of directors. So now, many times, especially with a small nonprofit, the founder is on the board of directors. And there are, bylaws. Now, they can be a little political, and I'm going to try not drag this on too much. So feel free to interrupt me. You can start a charity and be voted out of it, right? Because you don't own it. There's a board, there's a majority, there are bylaws that are supposed to be followed. It also isn't cheap. Up $4,000 or $5,000 to become a nonprofit. I mean, maybe you could do it a little bit less, but that's kind of the ballpark. There are a lot of requirements out there. There's a lot of accountability, which, although that may make it harder to start a nonprofit, that is really good for what we're going to go over today, and that is holding charities accountable and them, reporting their information. To be completely realistic, if it's a very, very small charity, and they nominate their friends and family in the community, right? Then, although you don't technically own it, the board of directors probably isn't going to go against their friends and family, but that doesn't mean it isn't there. So, for example, although the executive director might be at the board meetings and involved in the day-to-day operations, they're not the boss. At the end of the day, they have to report to a board. The majority of the time, board members really aren't even supposed to be allowed in day-to-day operations. I think of it as more, depending on the board, generally speaking, nonprofits look for individuals who either can donate money to them or, have some value they can add. The ARC put out a great board of directors request, meaning they were very transparent. It was a year or two ago. Becca, while I'm chatting, if you could find that link or something, the board of directors had like an open nomination with the ARC of the United States. If you could find that for leadership. And that's just a great example of, I mean, the ARC was fantastic with being so transparent about it, more so than most, but it gives a good insight, in my opinion, to what they might be looking for. So every organization that's a nonprofit has to file what is called a 990. These are all publicly available. And most organizations, as you can see, ASON will put it on their website. However, if you just Google a nonprofit and 990, you're likely to find it. There are also websites such as some called Brightscope. Think of it almost like a little bit of a search engine, just for searching for a nonprofit. And I'll open one up in a minute. Now, If it's a very small nonprofit, they will have very little information. There are just less requirements for a smaller organization to make it easier on them. So, if it's one where it's only like a few $1,000s a year in donations and things like that, there aren't as many requirements for them. Think of like a small business may or may not have less. So my
Mhm.
last thing on my soapbox before I pull up a 990 and go over it is, so it takes a long time to, again, it's called a 501c3. It's not cheap. You don't own it. There are lots of requirements on things you have to do. You have to have bylaws and policies, and there's treasurer, president, election. It's and with some other changes to tax laws, the vast majority of people do not get tax deductions for donating to nonprofits these days anyway, unless it's very significant amounts. There are some exceptions. So I find that was sometimes a good reason to have a nonprofit, is because, maybe the individual might get the tax deduction and you were able to, mention that. If you have an idea, you don't know if you're going to really get donations, you don't know how much. It is almost certainly better to start a business. Now, you can start a business and there's what's called a certified B Corp, right? Like basically profit for good, like me and Becca, right? We're not nonprofits, but I don't think anyone can deny. Well, maybe there's probably one or two, but for the most part, that again, we do good things, we give back. But again, we do, pay ourselves, we don't ask for donations. So they're just not tax deductible. Now, if there is a small local nonprofit that you are friendly with, I do know that you can also approach them potentially and say, hey, can I kind of be like part of you-ish for that tax deduction piece, like under them? So that's also not uncommon either, to almost affiliate with a nonprofit because they have that status. To simplify, a nonprofit is a lot of work. Most people aren't getting the tax deduction anyway. And you are building something that you don't own, that at the end of the day, you don't have say over. So I would just caution people and look at, not doing a nonprofit first, right? It's just a lot of work and I'm not quite sure the benefit, is there. So with that said, any questions before I pull up it's called a 990? Okay. So I just Googled 990 ASAN, and they have on their site, they have two things. So they have their 2019 990. It does take a while for these to show up. So I am not remotely surprised that they don't have a 2020. I would be a little surprised if they did. Now, one thing unique to ASAN is they have an annual report that is like the prettiest I've like ever seen. An annual report, think of it as the summary of the boring IRS tax form. They may or may not be as easy to find. Isn't this gorgeous? Like, who made this? Like, I hadn't looked at this before. Now, this is not the legal document. To be blunt, I don't know if the annual report's supposed to be public or not. I think it should be. It's a great thing to do. Yeah, this is like awesome, isn't it? So
Gorgeous.
it truly is. Like, I actually had no idea. And you can see they break down very transparently how they spend their money, right? How they get their money. how much money they got, right? Like this is all public information. They are required to report it, right? And sometimes there's technicalities. You can see a note at the bottom. Yeah, I'm like, oh, I'm actually still in shock with how nice this looks and what they did in 2020. So, it's all here. Sorry, I'm just like still amazed with how nice this is. Again, board of, directors, the staff. So now this is, let's call it like a summary version of, the 990. Does anyone want to take a guess at how much the board of directors is paid? And by the way, I don't know the answer.
I don't know. I have never been paid to sit on the board, so I am going to say $0.
Yes, it is almost certainly $0. I have never heard of a nonprofit board that pays anyone. They don't. And actually, it's generally quite the opposite. It is that the board of directors a lot of time are strategically chosen for their ability to contribute to an organization. And that may be connections. A lot of times, especially as an organization gets bigger, no matter how good they are, it is financial. So I remember when I was reading the arc of the United States, they were very transparent and they said, we want board of directors who are who have money. Here we go. Statement, or this is their priority. I love how transparent this is. They're saying for a board of directors, we prefer somebody of a minority, of religion, younger, if they have an intellectual disability, right? If they have any of these skills, if they're located in any of these states. And look how transparent they are, that, they want somebody who has money to be on their board of directors. Generally, when I'm on a board of directors, I do give to the organization. Usually it's because I'm, again, passionate about them. So I super appreciate how they did this with the knowledge and skills.
I do too. I want to give a slightly different angle on this for just a second.
Yep.
So as someone who has worked in nonprofit, right, and worked for the board of directors, right, it's really important to look at how an organization builds their board, right? So Andrew's talking a lot about how some people are picked because they can make large donations and things like that. So when you look at a board, if a board is going to run well, you hope to find a balanced board. So not everyone is on that board because they can donate. Maybe half of them are on there because they can donate. And their donation and then their time at the meetings is considered their job at the board, right? And then usually the other half of the board who are not monetary donating members end up doing a lot of the heavy lifting, right? So when there's event organizations or somebody needs to be somewhere or put things together, the board does a lot of those things. It behooves you as an organization to have a board that is inclusive, right? That is inclusive in all the ways we need to be inclusive. But also in terms of what they do for a living, like what skill sets they're bringing to the organization, right? So someone who may not be bringing money may be someone who's very good with finances, right? Or somebody who is a lawyer, right? Who's in the legal profession. And so that there are other things coming to the table for the board so that your board is balanced, right? So that hopefully you have some of your stakeholders, which is what we call the people who you're serving as a nonprofit. So hopefully your board even has some of those stakeholders on the board, helping to kind of talk about what your constituents would want from their organization. So when you're going through all of these documents and thinking about these boards being put together, as you're thinking about supporting or not supporting an organization, one of the really cheap ways to tell whether you think an organization will be long-term successful is by looking at their board and how they put their board together, right? So I just wanted to insert that in there because from the internal perspective, it's really important who you put on your board because they either push forward the stuff that you want to have being done with the organization or they hold you back, right? So building a board that supports you and the mission and all that is also important. So that's it. I'm done now.
Yep. And again, you know, a smaller nonprofit is going to be a bit different than a larger nonprofit in so many ways. So let's start with Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. They have a 990. There is this 990EZ that is what it kind of sounds like. It's easier, and that's usually because they are smaller, less money. So there is a CPA usually certifies, you know, there's usually an audit with the bigger ones, looking over the books, making sure, you know, everything is accounted for. So as I'm scrolling down publicly, they have their mission. Very,
Oh, shoot.
they have the voting members, the number, the independent voting members, the individuals who are employed, you know, number of volunteers. Some organizations can have, again, unrelated business income if they had something for the nonprofit that may or may not be generating income. They show the prior year and the current year. And it also, again, especially as you get bigger, some of just how they may do accounting is, you know, when they get the grant versus sometimes they're restricted. It's complicated accounting stuff. So you can see how much ASAN on this line paid for, you know, salary. That was a large part of their budget. You can see how much assets they have. You can see their expenses. And if you remember on that very nice graphic, they went over it a bit for us. So here is their statement and accomplishments. And again, all of this is audited, so it filed with the IRS. You know, of course, a nonprofit, you know, is not going to say they did horrible things, and you assume that none are. But you know, it is their words, even if truthful. So again, we're here program expenses. And I might scroll through a little bit. And again, section 501c3, when we hear a nonprofit, that's almost certainly what we mean. There are some other types for like, for example, political organizations that aren't deductible, but that's not really what we're looking at here. So I'm just scrolling down. Did the organization do this? The rest of this is usually pretty boring. I'm seeing if there's anything exciting. I have not looked at this until today, although I've looked at other 990s. So here's something interesting. So we went over how much any of the board of directors is paid and average hours per week, you know, in the organization, the position, and again, if any compensation, if any. So there's chairperson, the secretary is an important position. I know it almost sounds like maybe it isn't. Many also have a treasurer. I don't see one, which is perfectly fine. I am usually asked to be a treasurer, which makes sense in theory, but I am unable to be a treasurer because it is a conflict. It's ironic. So they're saying, again, they got so much in government grants, membership dues. You know, this is a very not complicated 990. All things considered, they're not small by any means, but they're not huge either. So again, it was Julie, who's the board of directors. So this is her compensation. That's not uncommon at all, especially for smaller nonprofits. A lot of larger ones, that is not there. And again, you can see just other fees, services, advertising, you can see fundraising, meals, subscriptions, all of this is all available to see how anyone did all of it. Okay, I'm kind of even bored looking at it now. So let me just see if there's anything else remotely interesting before I move on to another 990. Does anyone have any questions? And it is fun to see the history too. Okay, so this is, what do we have here? Oh, contributors. So again, you have who's contributed to the organization. It's all right here. I can't recall off the top of my head all of the necessary requirements. Some of them can be grants and other things, and I think it's only above a certain dollar amount. You do also have to report lobbying and political activities if there are any. Because if you're a, remember I said there was another type of 501c something for political organizations that aren't deductible. So that is one of the reasons it's asked to be there. Okay, moving on. Can anyone guess what 990 I'm going to look at next? It's not a hard guess.
won't
Okay,
give
we're
it
going to look at
away.
Autism Speaks 990. Okay.
Yeah, let's.
There we go. So this is Autism Speaks 990. They are without question a bigger organization. So there's probably going to be more information here. And what you can see is this is what their mission is. You can see the number of members of the board. You can see it's quite a lot. 216 employees, and our total number of volunteers, 188,000 seems like a lot of volunteers. I don't know what their basis is for volunteers. That, actually is kind of curious. Contribution and grants. Again, when you see a discrepancy this big, it could be somebody gave a large amount of money that may or may not be accessible for a long time. And by the way, anything I'm saying, please don't construe as promoting, defending, or insulting any organization. I'm just saying, generally speaking, some things that I, may or may not see, just looking through these before. Accounting is a, business for a reason. So here is, again, filed the IRS, etc. And if there's a question or two, Becca, and I miss it, feel free to interrupt me.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm covering it. I got you.
Okay. Again, here is their mission. I don't see anything about a cure or eugenics. That doesn't mean they're not hiding it in a secret basement somewhere. Anyway, okay. Moving on. So here is stuff that they did. Remember, it is in their own their own words. They are obviously going to try to speak a bit more highly of themselves and say what they're doing. So, aided, again, 4.1 million people, provided online toolkit. So it seems like, again, from these reports, right, 335 meetings with congressional leaders convened, to address disparities related to autism. Now, if this one seems more detailed, a lot of it is just because they're a larger organization. That doesn't mean, a smaller organization isn't doing things. There's just more reporting required. Moving on. So you can see who is the CEO, how much they make. And it's all right there. It's all transparent. So you can see, I think Angela stepped down recently. And again, here are the directors. And this is And you could compare this salary to like the American Red Cross, other larger nonprofits. You can also see, very interestingly, does anyone notice how much the board of directors spends per week with Autism Speaks? It's a rhetorical question, kind of. It's only 1 hour a week, supposedly, which I
It's
don't
probably
think
not
you
even
can
that.
put. It's probably not even that. You can see ASAN, I mean, it was 10 to 15, right? It
Mhm.
was quite a bit. Again, also not uncommon for a smaller nonprofit. Actually, some bigger nonprofits I've been a part of have even specifically asked me not to participate in some day-to-day operations. Not in any negative way. So, but this is, you know, that goes to show you how useful their board of directors is. Hint, hint, it means about zero, even though they technically run it, right? With the smaller organizations, the board of directors are really running it in a lot of ways, donating their time, not their money. Autism Speaks, their board of directors are there, but for anyone who thinks that, you know, a board of directors meetings for the most part really decides anything of significance in a large organization is mistaken. If
Mhm.
if all the autistics were suddenly board of directors of Autism Speaks, not much would change that quickly at the end of the day, because they're also not the ones to implement it. I'm
Okay,
not.
I'm gonna pause. Can I pause
Sorry.
you for a second
Yes.
right there? So again, to me, this is like another thing, big organization versus small
Yes.
organization, right? So the bigger organizations get, right, the more stagnant to me the boards get, right? And the less they require of their board members, right? And so what you see here, right? Like we had, what did it, was it like 200 and something employees, right? So instead of looking at the board in terms of helping to make decisions and making things move forward in a large organization, the board's job is basically to sit through a meeting and have the annual report like read to them essentially, right? And then they all go, okay, everything's fine. So like the board is about that, those long-term decision-making things, right? And how the direction you want the organization to go, where you want most of your donations to go, that kind of stuff is what eventually lands on the board's desk. But who they hire, who they fire, what programs they do, when they have campaigns on things, that's usually a day-to-day operations thing, right?
I can.
The board doesn't really get bothered with, other than like the big term decisions, like does this date work for you and stuff like this. So when we're looking at that, I want you guys to understand that the 15 hours that the folks on ASAN board are giving in, right? They are actually doing all the work. If you saw, it was a very small board, right? It was only, I think, 6 or 7 people. And this board will be much bigger. And these people on the board will have many secretaries, right? And it's that kind of thing, so it's less hands-on for the board, the bigger an organization gets, right? I just, at this time, I'm just gonna throw this out there because it really shocked me to see the imbalance between employees and volunteers there. And then to kind of get a glimpse at the salary that folks are getting, it to me is no wonder that their staff is so small and they have so many volunteers. It's like they're trying to keep their staff small to pay, so they can pay them a lot, right? Instead of having a larger staff and sort of spreading it out a bit. So that's a little weird to me, that it's a huge imbalance. So I don't know how they're training their volunteers and all of that kind of stuff.
I
So
also don't.
curious.
Yeah, I also don't know what their definition of a volunteer is, because almost 200,000 is really high. Like
Yeah.
that's like shocking.
Yeah.
I mean, we, you know, I don't know if we have the time on this meeting, but like I'd want to look at a comparison, like maybe the National Special Olympics or the Arc of the United
Right.
States would be,
Yep.
you know, a good example as a comparison,
Mhm.
just because they're a large, you know, again, a similar size.
Right.
Now there are, remember I did mention there are websites like I mentioned called Brightscope or some others that will help make this information a little potentially easier to find. It's not always like as up to date or completely accurate, especially as you get a smaller organization. So again, you have grants, you have compensation, you have other salary, you can see there's lobbying, again, legal, accounting, all this fun stuff. Um, I'm just seeing if there's anything else exciting, um, and they named some of it right here. So this genome sequencing, that's all the eugenics that we hear about all the time. That was sarcasm. Well, maybe not. But anyway, moving
We
on.
scroll past their advertising budget too.
Yeah. It was
Is that,
there.
I'm just curious. Now I'm just being nosy and curious because it's open.
Well, they break it down a few different ways because like direct mail's obviously advertising.
Right.
Oh, there you go. Advertising and promotion, $7 million.
Oh, I'm dying inside. Okay.
So that is how much they spent. Now, there are, just so you know, there are statistics that say if you spend this much on advertising and on mail, that you should get a return on investment this much because people get the letter in the mail, etc. Kind of one of those spend money to make money kind of things. Again, donor restrictions and all that stuff can get complicated. Somebody says they donate money for a certain purpose. It can only be used for that. How all this accounting works. It's even giving me a headache at this point. So trying to look at it. And then I just want to see if there's anything else remotely interesting. Again, gift grants, contributions. Let's see. I just want to, if anyone has any questions while I'm scrolling through. Think. Okay, so again, political lobbying. Here is some supplemental information, again, about things they say they did. And that, again, they're saying they do. And you will need to take this pretty well. There's, again, you're filing true IRS forms. You're filing very strict legal documents, right? I would be extremely shocked if any charity lied on a form like this. That doesn't mean that they're not going to present themselves in a good light, but it's always, it should always be factual. You should take it for what it's worth. If you find that it isn't, that is something I would definitely inquire to them about, and they should be able to provide that. I don't know the consequences for not doing it, but I'm sure they're not good if you're not living up to what you're doing. So here are things that they did. So let's see if there's anything else interesting on all these pages. What was that? If you don't understand what a lot of these things are, I don't either. So don't feel bad. Grant making. Let's see. Well, okay. Was that they gave a $50 grant to the sub-Saharan Africa? Oh, 50,000. Okay, that's significant. $50 would be insignificant. So I think this might be, know they distribute lots of grants as well. So I think that's part of what it is. So here's fundraising events, gross receipts from different events and the gala and golf events. And here's the rent cost, direct expenses. And let's see direct mail. Remember I said that there's it's like common, like I've taken courses and it's there's a ratio and it's a thing. So here you have who has given money as grants for the organizations. ASAN had the same thing. So just scrolling, financial assistance, CARES grants, some of these were like money donated for them to give out. Like I actually know this one is like somebody donated money and then they ask Autism Speaks to like every year like administer like who might be worthy of it.
Hmm.
It's a thing. I mean, I don't, fully understand it. Just seeing if there's anything else interesting. So this was again the compensation for each person on the these are the highest paid. There are, it doesn't show the complete salary of everyone there. So
Oh, that is a lovely bonus to get there.
yeah, so
Yeah.
so okay, see, here's the reason. So this was approved by the board of directors, and the bonus was based upon meeting certain goals reviewed by a compensation committee. This is not uncommon, especially in larger nonprofits, even larger companies, etc. You hit a certain metric, either however that's metric is named, if the organization gets there, kind of like getting a stock bonus. I'm not defending it or encouraging it. I'm just saying it's a common.
I'm not, what bothers me is not that they do it, because I know that that's regular practice. What bothers me is the amounts that we're talking about, right? I mean, it's hard to swallow $7 million in advertising, like to people who
So,
don't even like their advertising.
but
It's terrible.
but but maybe to put it in perspective too,
Yeah.
right? I don't have the perspective, but if somebody approached me today and they said, Andrew, if you advertise $7 million, we're going to get you 14 million in donations. I would
Right.
say, okay, sounds good. Right. So I'm just, again, everything's in perspective.
I get that part, but then I would say to you, well, Andrew, now that you have $14 million, what are you going to do? And I would
Well,
surely hope that you wouldn't spend another $7 million on advertising again, right? I mean, at what point, do you start looking at, well, I guess, because when I look at organization stuff, I guess I look at it slightly different, and I wonder, like, who's in charge of where you're spending your money, and why does it look so imbalanced to me, right?
and if you want to question an organization,
Yeah.
these are great questions to ask. They should have the answers. They are, this is, I'm sure there's a very high penalty of perjury provision with anything they're sending here, right? They should
Right.
be accountable. I mean, they're not going to completely turn over everything, but nobody's going to turn over like all their internal documents all the time.
Right.
But they should be able to answer where their money's going. That because let's say I'm a prospective donor, right? And I see that they bring in this money, I see where they spent it. I want to make sure my money is going right where I want it to go. So, and
that's why we get those donors that donate money for a specific reason, because they want control over where it gets spent. Right? They don't want to donate and then find out that all their money went to advertising when they really wanted to help in a certain way through the organization. So I know that's where that kind of stuff comes from. But see, like, to me, this is so important. I don't know about you guys, I'm not a money person, right? I don't look at it like a financial person. But when I look at it as a business person, I go, who's making these decisions? And like, what metric did this lady hit that she deserves $450,000 bonus? Right? When most of her constituents are getting $900 from the government a month.
That is
Right?
a,
Like if it was me and when I go to donate and stuff, that's the stuff that I look at. Like, I don't want to participate in poor decision making. I don't want to give my money to an organization I feel like is making unwise decisions, right? So that's how I look at it, I guess. Maybe it's slightly different than from like a financial perspective and legal perspective.
no, and that's honestly how most people should be looking at things. And you can see they literally just filed their 2020, not too long ago. I'm actually even surprised it's up this quickly. Usually there's a bit of a delay, but you can see there's a compensation committee. There's committees of committees with tons of wasted time. But they're saying, again, several national nonprofits, similar size and scope, right? So they, at least in their mind, they are justified in what they are doing. And again, there is something to be said for, paying a competitive rate. It's from other large nonprofits that I, look at. The bonus, I don't know what metric she hit, but it's not, I was board of alumni for like one of my colleges I went to, and the numbers and the compensation were roughly similar. So if you want to make an impact, and you want to make an impact and have your dollar go the furthest, who do you think really appreciates $1,000? Autism
All
Speaks, who
nonprofits.
has over $20 million in their bank account, or ASAN. I am not saying who you should give your money to. I think you should give your money to whoever you want. Generally speaking, though, a smaller nonprofit, just like a small business, will appreciate it more. Target won't notice whether you go there or not today. Me and Becca will notice if you decide to do business with us. That doesn't mean that I will ever boycott Target. I'm pretty sure my wife would murder me for that. And actually, I do think Target would notice if my wife did stop shopping there.
Probably.
So, which is probably a scary thought. So this is what we want to go over today. We thought it was kind of timely. I apologize if it seemed a little extra boring. But this is just type in Google the nonprofit and 990, and
Well, see, what I love about this topic is it doesn't matter where you sit on these things. Fact is fact, right?
Exactly.
And so when we talk about organizations and where we're supporting, this is, to me, the real way, and probably I would say the right way to choose where you're donating, right? It's super easy to get caught up in, just whatever you're doing, or someone is part of an organization, and so you donate there because this person is there, right? It's easy to get into a habit too of donating to the same place, right? Like you can set up automatic donations and things now. But I think it's important. You're part of a process, right? It's a consumerism when we are dealing with, even though they're quote unquote nonprofits, they're still a business, right? And you don't want to support businesses that you don't think run well. And you certainly wouldn't dunk your money into an organization that you feel is not doing a good job, or isn't handling their money well, or isn't making decisions that you agree with. And so it's not, it's real easy these days to donate. Facebook makes it easy to start a fundraiser and finish a fundraiser, and easy for you to give somebody $10 here and there. But I think we need to remember that there's information out there, and it is public and available and easy to get to, right? That is fact and can give you the real truth instead of, playing telephone with people or passing gossip or whatever it is, because fact is fact. And when you compare the two organizations, like we just did, what you saw is small organization versus large organization, right? Big kind of corporate organization, small grassroots organization, and the way that they're put together. And it's up to you to decide when and where you want to support what organizations, but know that you don't have to make those choices blindly, right? I mean, Andrew just pulled this up, and in the last 50 minutes, we went through 2 annual reports essentially, right? It doesn't take that long, and it's not that hard. And sharing fact to me is so much more important than sharing anything else, right? There's no point in arguing over fact when it exists. So I think it was a really important topic, because I think especially for me, I don't know if your inboxes look like my inbox, but in April, my inbox is a mess of people asking me for money. It's just every newsletter I'm on or every single autism organization I participate in, everybody wants my $20. And I don't have a bazillion $20 to give away. So how do I decide? And this is how I decide where it's going to go. Right. And now you guys can do that and you can teach other people to do that. So thank you, Andrew, for this. I really appreciate it very much.
Yeah, no, thank
I
you.
really do.
So I mean, that's it. Feel free to email us questions for, next time and what we, will talk about. And hope everyone has a good rest of their April.
Thank you so much for joining us, guys. We'll see you next
Thank
month.
you. Okay. See you next
Thank you.
month.